October 12, 1942. The North African sun beats down mercilessly on the parched sands outside El Alamein. The desert stretches endlessly, a flat expanse of tan and ochre, broken only by the occasional jagged rock or the shadow of a distant dune. And there, on that blistering day, a small group of German Panzer crews believed themselves untouchable, their steel beasts gleaming in the sun, tracks biting into the earth, guns ready to sweep any Allied force aside. Confidence was the currency of the battlefield, and they had it in abundance. But confidence, as they would soon learn, can be a fragile thing. On the American side, the infantrymen were grim-faced and under-equipped. They had been told repeatedly, a tank is death incarnate. One shot from its 88mm cannon could obliterate a foxhole, a gun emplacement, or a line of soldiers in a heartbeat. The Germans had every reason to believe that their armor columns would roll over the desert like unstoppable thunder. And yet, there was a new variable on the horizon, a small, seemingly innocuous shoulder-fired weapon known as a bazooka. The M1 rocket launcher was a simple device, a hollow steel tube about 4 feet long, capable of firing a high-explosive rocket with enough force to pierce the side armor of a Panzer. For the men carrying it, it was awkward and heavy, a weapon that required precision, courage, and nerves of steel. And yet, it was about to rewrite the rules of the battlefield. Imagine the scene. An American soldier kneeling behind a low dune, hands trembling slightly as he shoulders the bazooka. The sun glints off the tube, dust swirling around his boots. He takes a breath, aims, and fires. There's a roar, not the measured mechanical sound of a tank's cannon, but a sudden, explosive whoosh, a shriek of metal and fire. The rocket strikes the side of the German Panzer, punching through armor as though it were paper. Smoke and flame erupt from the tank. Crew members scrambling, shouting, some diving to the ground as the vehicle shudders and finally stops, disabled. It was a moment both shocking and almost surreal. For the German soldiers, it was the kind of thing that didn't fit the rules they had learned at military academy. Tanks were invincible, or at least that was the doctrine. And yet here was an American infantryman, ordinary in appearance, wielding a weapon no bigger than a broomstick, taking down what should have been a near impenetrable fortress of steel. A soldier later recounted, years after the battle, "We were told to aim carefully, aim, fire, and pray. I never felt more alive or terrified at the same time. The heat of the tube burned his shoulder. The smoke stung his eyes. Yet he had done what was thought impossible. He had faced the desert's mightiest machine and emerged, if not unscathed, then victorious. The irony was not lost on anyone watching. Here were the giants of German industry and military might, brought low by a weapon that fit neatly into a man's hands, that required nothing more than courage, patience, and a steady aim. It was, in a very real sense, the desert's David and Goliath moment, and the Americans were armed with the stone. By the end of that day, word began to trickle through German ranks. Something unusual, something terrifying, was in their midst. The bazooka was not merely a weapon, it was a psychological shockwave. And as the smoke cleared over the sand and the disabled tanks burned in the afternoon sun, one fact became undeniable. The battlefield was changing in ways that no one had fully anticipated. But what came next shocked them even more. The North African desert, once a vast theater of predictability, was suddenly a place of confusion and disbelief. German Panzer crews, confident in their steel armor and precision drills, were encountering an enemy they had not prepared for, the bazooka. What began as a curious anomaly, a rocket striking a tank with improbable accuracy, quickly escalated into a pattern too consistent to ignore. Reports filtered back to German command. Tanks lost without warning, armored columns halted mid-advance, crews scrambling in ways that defied all tactical logic. In the diaries of some Panzer officers, one line appeared repeatedly. "What weapon is this? Infantrymen with handheld monsters." The phrase sounds almost comical now, but at the time, it carried the weight of genuine fear. For the American soldiers, the bazooka was a simple solution to a seemingly insurmountable problem. The M1 rocket launcher had limitations. It required exposure to aim and fire. The rockets could misfire, and accuracy was a challenge at long distances. Yet, in the hands of determined infantrymen, it became a formidable equalizer. Soldiers learned quickly. fire from cover, aim for weak points, and strike decisively. One sergeant recalled, "I remember the first time we disabled a Panzer. It was like hitting lightning with a rock. And yet, somehow it worked. The battlefield became a theater of stark contrasts. German armor, sleek and powerful, had dominated campaigns across Europe and North Africa. And now, against the simplest of handheld American weapons, it faltered. Infantrymen, once the underdogs, were suddenly the harbingers of terror for crews that had never feared men on foot. The desert echoed with the roar of rockets, the crackle of armor surrendering, and the panicked shouts of soldiers realizing their mechanized superiority was no longer guaranteed. Statistics from that period underline the magnitude of surprise. Within the first month of Bazooka deployment in North Africa, dozens of German tanks were reported as disabled or destroyed. In some skirmishes, American infantry units equipped with the M1 destroyed more armored vehicles than expected, reshaping not only the immediate tactical map, but also German strategic assumptions. The Panzer divisions, previously seen as almost invincible, now face a new reality. Every foot soldier might carry potential for their destruction. Yet amidst the chaos, there were moments of irony. German generals, reviewing reports of tanks felled by handheld weapons, could not hide their incredulity. Memo after memo described the baffling effectiveness of the bazooka. Imagine reading that your best tanks were being taken out by what looks like a pipe on a soldier's shoulder, one historian later noted. It was a clash of expectation versus reality, a scenario both terrifying and, in retrospect, a little absurd. The personal dimension of this shift was profound. Soldiers on both sides experienced a transformation of perspective. For the Americans, the bazooka was more than metal and explosives. It was empowerment, a tangible symbol that even the most imposing enemy could be challenged. For the Germans, it was a source of anxiety, uncertainty, and a sobering lesson that the battlefield could be changed by innovation in the hands of a willing and courageous soldier. By the end of these early encounters, the psychological impact was as significant as the physical. The Germans' belief in their armored invincibility had been shaken. Every rustle in the dunes, every glimpse of a soldier behind cover, carried the hint of danger. And as the Americans continued to perfect their use of bazooka, the question lingered ominously. If a simple shoulder-fired rocket could disrupt a tank, what other surprises might the U.S. infantry hold in reserve? The stage was set for a dramatic escalation. The Germans had been stunned, their pride dented, and their tactics challenged. But what Eisenhower and his generals had envisioned went far beyond a mere surprise on the battlefield. It was a calculated revolution in infantry warfare, one that would reshape the war in ways even the enemy could not yet imagine. By late 1942, the bazooka had transformed from an experimental weapon into a symbol of American ingenuity and a source of genuine unease for the Germans. But it was not just a tool of destruction. It was a carefully orchestrated component of a broader strategy, championed at the highest levels of command. At the center of this vision stood General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander, whose understanding of both battlefield psychology and innovation would turn a simple shoulder-fired tube into a weapon of victory. Eisenhower recognized a crucial fact. Victory in war was not measured solely by firepower or armored might, but by morale and perception. The German Panzer crews, confident and disciplined, could be destabilized if their assumptions about invincibility were shattered. The bazooka, in Eisenhower's eyes, was more than a rocket launcher. It was a psychological equalizer. Small, mobile teams of infantry could disrupt the enemy's momentum, forcing them to rethink strategies and divert resources to counter this handheld threat. Across the theaters of North Africa, Sicily, and eventually the beaches of Normandy, the bazooka began to demonstrate its broader strategic impact. Tactical reports showed that teams armed with the M1 rocket launcher were able to disable armored vehicles, suppress enemy fortifications, and create openings for infantry advances. A notable example occurred during the push into Tunisia, where American units reporting the destruction of multiple panzers caused German officers to issue urgent countermeasures. The fear of the unexpected, the unknown power wielded by ordinary soldiers, had become a formidable factor in its own right. The numbers tell a compelling story. In North Africa alone, bazooka teams were responsible for the destruction or disabling of dozens of enemy tanks in the first months of deployment. By the time the Allies launched Operation Husky in Sicily in 1943. The weapon's effectiveness had been documented extensively in field reports. Infantrymen who had previously been marginalized in the shadow of armored divisions were suddenly frontline heroes. Commanders noted that morale among American troops soared when soldiers were equipped with the M1. The sense that they could, indeed, take the fight to the tanks fostered confidence that spread across entire units. And yet, the weapon was not without its quirks. Misfires were common, and accuracy could be elusive under the stress of battle. One sergeant recounted, "I once fired 3 rockets before hitting anything, and all I managed to do was singe my own boots. But when one finally found its mark, oh, the look on those German faces. It was worth every charred toe." Such moments of human imperfection added texture to the stark reality of war, revealing bravery, frustration, and occasionally irony in equal measure. The strategic implications extended beyond the battlefield. Eisenhower's deployment of the Bazooka forced the Germans to revise their armor doctrine, reconsider tank formations, and even rethink the psychological expectations of their soldiers. A one-standard assumption that tanks could dominate infantry with impunity was now obsolete. Reports from German archives describe increasing anxiety, with officers warning their men to never underestimate infantry with small but deadly weapons. For Eisenhower, this validation of psychological warfare underscored a broader principle. Sometimes, the smallest innovation can unsettle the mightiest opponent. By the time the Allies advanced through Italy, the bazooka had achieved near-mythical status among German forces. Stories circulated of American soldiers taking down tanks with astonishing precision, of panzer crews abandoning their vehicles in panic, and of units learning to fear what had once seemed negligible. The weapon had become both literal and symbolic, an instrument of destruction and a testament to the ingenuity and courage of those who wielded it. In the desert, on the beaches, and in the mountains, the lesson was clear. The war was no longer merely a contest of steel, numbers, or firepower. It was a war of ideas, of innovation, and of bold execution. And as the Germans confronted the reality of a simple shoulder-fired rocket that could topple their most formidable machines, one truth emerged unmistakably. The bazooka had rewritten the rules of armored warfare. Yet the story was not finished. The ultimate impact on tactics, morale, and the perception of invincibility was still unfolding. The Germans would come to realize that no tank, no matter how mighty, could remain safe from the ingenuity and resolve of the soldiers who carried this weapon. By the time the war had shifted from the deserts of North Africa to the rolling hills of Italy and the beaches of Normandy, the bazooka had become more than a weapon. It was a symbol of ingenuity, of courage, and of the fact that even the smallest tool in the right hands could change the course of a battle. German soldiers who once laughed at the idea of infantrymen toppling their armored monsters now treated the M1 rocket launcher with wary respect and a fair share of fear. Captured German reports revealed the psychological impact in stark detail. Panzer crews began altering their tactics, spacing out formations, doubling lookout posts, and treating every foot soldier as a potential threat. One officer's diary entry reads, "The Americans have a new trick. Even their weakest men can destroy the strongest of our tanks. It is maddening and infuriating." The trick, of course, was no trick at all. It was technology paired with daring, training, and determination. On the American side, the legacy of the bazooka was equally profound. Infantrymen who had been overshadowed by tanks and artillery now found themselves in a position of authority, capable of striking fear into the enemy. Training manuals emphasized teamwork, precision, and courage, and stories of successful bazooka crews became legendary among new recruits. The small, portable launcher had shifted the balance of confidence in the field, empowering soldiers to see themselves not as expendable components of a machine, but as decisive actors in the chaos of battle. Irony lingered in the history. The Germans' industrial might, the most advanced tanks, and the finest crews in the world had been checked, and often humbled, by a weapon that fit on a man's shoulder. As one historian put it, it was as if the universe had handed a hammer to a child and asked him to fell a cathedral. And yet, somehow it worked. The statistics support the legend. Tens of thousands of bazooka units were produced during the war, seeing action across multiple theaters. By the end of World War II, they had contributed to the disabling, or destruction of thousands of armored vehicles, a tangible effect on the battlefield that was matched by an equally important psychological shift. Enemy forces were no longer invulnerable, and American infantrymen carried that realization with pride and determination. Perhaps the most lasting impact was on the philosophy of warfare itself. The bazooka demonstrated that innovation did not always require grandeur or complexity. Sometimes, simplicity coupled with bold execution could redefine the rules of engagement. It foreshadowed future developments in portable anti-tank weapons, infantry-based missile systems, and asymmetric strategies that remain a cornerstone of modern military thinking. And yet, amidst the numbers and strategy, there is a human dimension that endures. Soldiers, both American and German, wrote home about the bazooka, its roar, its flash, the way it made impossible possible. One American private remembered, "When I fired that first rocket and saw the tank go up in flames, I felt like I had touched history. And maybe, just maybe, I had." As we look back, the image that lingers is the same one that began the story. A lone infantryman, shoulder braced against a weapon, aiming at a steel giant, smoke curling in the sun-drenched desert air. That single moment, repeated thousands of times across Europe and Africa, reshaped the perception of power, the dynamics of the battlefield, and the very notion of what a soldier could accomplish. In the end, the bazooka was more than a tool of destruction. It was a lesson in courage, ingenuity, and a profound truth that history can be altered not only by giants, but by those brave enough to carry a small weapon with big consequences. And as tanks burned and soldiers adapted, one fact became undeniable. The age of invincible armor was over, and a new era of warfare, where the smallest handheld weapon could redefine the battlefield, had begun.